Hi class, this is the video tutorial for chapter 5 on data manipulation and transaction control, and this chapter is all about how we can use SQL to modify the tables within our Oracle database. So let's go ahead and jump right in and get started. We have a lot to cover. The first thing I want to do is there is a build script for chapter 5, and it's in the data files you should have downloaded, and it has an _5 in it for chapter 5. Just taking a look at it real quick, just as kind of a reminder, these scripts, whenever you run them, the first thing it does is it drops all of the existing tables, and then it goes back in and creates tables and inserts values into those tables. So if you mess up or you are doing your homework and you want to just completely start over, you can always rerun this script and it will drop everything, completely wipe out any changes you've made to the data, and then when you run it again, it will basically recreate it from scratch. So you can essentially start all over. So if you mess up and insert a value when you don't mean to insert a value, or change something you didn't mean to change, you can always go back and just completely start over, and it shouldn't hurt anything. So I just wanted to cover that to make sure that you guys know that option is available. So let's go ahead and open our SQL Plus program. Should be in your Oracle folder. Run SQL command line. And once we open this, we want to go ahead and connect as our Scott user. Enter the password. It's probably going to be Tiger, unless you've changed it. And so then we're connected. So then the next thing we want to do is go ahead and run our build script for chapter 5. So the command for that is start C, and then you put the path of wherever you put the files. So I put my files in C, on the C drive in the CIT 171 folder. That just makes it a lot easier to type in whenever I need to. So C:\CIT 171 JLDB _build _5.SQL. So I'll go ahead and run that, and as you can see, it goes ahead and drops tables and creates new tables and creates rows within those tables. And so now I am all set. So let's go ahead and jump into, I'm going to kind of walk through the PowerPoint presentation, and then as we go through, I'm going to hop over to SQL Plus and show you guys some of the examples that they have in the book. And these will relate directly to the homework and the quizzes that you'll do for this chapter. So pay close attention to the examples that we go through. So just these are sort of the objectives for this chapter. We'll skip over these. So I guess really quickly, a brief introduction to what this chapter is all about. In the previous chapters, 3, chapter 4, we issued what they call DDL commands. That's data definition language, or DDL commands. Those are commands such as create table, alter table, drop table, things like that. So those are data definition commands that define the data that is in your database. So it says create a table, these are the columns I want to put in this table, or I can do alter table, which allows us to change the column names, the data types, things like that. So that's a data definition language, or DDL. What we're going to be doing in this chapter is what we call DML. DML, that's data manipulation language. So these commands are what we use to modify the data within the tables. So and when we issue these commands, we're going to be able to save the data permanently, and we can also, I'll show you how we can undo the changes as well using transaction control commands. So again, DDL, data definition language, that's create, alter, drop. Then you have data manipulation language, DML, which is what we're going to be using, which are the inserting data, updating data, deleting data, etc. Okay, So let's go ahead and jump into the insert command. And this is the first DML command that we're going to talk about. We're going to be talking mainly about insert, update, and delete. Insert is where we're going to be adding new rows to our table. And I'll walk through what insert into is and what value is, but basically all the insert command does is allows us to add new records or add new rows to our tables. So I believe in the textbook, and part of this build script, it's actually created a table that I don't think it's really part of the Just Lee Books database that we normally use. It's called Account Manager. And so if I hop over here to my table here, or sorry, into SQL Plus, and if I do select all from Account Manager, I had a typo, select all from Account Manager. It says no rows selected. That's because we haven't actually put any data into the table, but it at least shows us that the table does exist. So Account Manager is there, and actually I think in your book it defines what the columns are that are in this table. So let's go ahead and jump into how to do an insert statement and how to add a record to this Account Manager table. So the command is insert, and then you want to use also the keyword into. So insert into is going to be our command to do the insert, and after you do insert into, you want to follow that with the table name that you want to insert the values into. So if we want to insert the values into the Account Manager table, we're just going to type in Account Manager. So this is the basic insert into statement. There's also the next line are going to be the values clause. So the values are, these are the values that I want to insert into the table. So insert into, and then the table name defines which table you want to insert records in. Then the values clause is going to is where you're going to specify what the data is that you want to actually insert. So for example, if we look in our book, I'm going to put in the same information that they're going to put that they have in the book here. So bear with me as I type this. Last name, and then I believe this is a date, and I believe this is their salary and their commission, and then their region, and I end it with a semicolon. And when I run this statement, it's going to say one row created. So you know that you've successfully inserted a row if it says X number of rows created. So if in this case it's one row. So we've inserted one row into our table. So now if we select, and I'm just going to hit the up button to go back. By the way, it's a quick shortcut. If you don't already know, you can hit the up or down button to see previous statements that you've typed in. So if I go ahead and select all from this table again, I'm going to see that there's my record that I just added in. So the ID, T500, first name, last name, the employment date, salary, commission rate, and the region. Okay, so a couple of other things about let me go to the next slide here. A couple of other things about the syntax for the insert command. You want to enclose non-numeric data in single quotes. So what that means is if it's a string value, if it has letters, you want to make sure, or letters or other symbols, anything that's non-numeric, you want to make sure you have that in single quotes. If you don't, Oracle is going to throw an error. So you have to make sure you have single quotes around your strings. Second thing is, if a column list is not provided, a value must be assigned to each column in the table. So let me show you what I mean by that, and we have some examples here. And I won't go and type all of these in, but there's two ways you can do this. So you can do it with a column list or without a column list. So the first example up here at the top is what we just now did. There's no column list there. We just say insert into Account Manager, and then we put our values in our value clause, and that's it. We also, though, can do a column list where we say insert into Account Manager, and we list out all of the columns that we want to insert into. If we don't have a column list, that assumes that we are going to insert values for every single column in the table. So if there are, let's see, if we have values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 values, that assumes that there's also 7 columns in our table. So if you only wanted to, let's say, put in values for these first 3 columns, ID, first name, last name, all you would need to include in the column list are those first 3 columns, and then you would only have 3 values in the values field. You also, whenever you do it without a column list, it is assuming that you're putting these values in the same order that the columns are. So you don't want to mix up last name and first name, or put the date where the ID is going to be in this first column here, in this first value. So it assumes that you're doing them in order. If you specify a column list, you can put these in any order and they match up with the values. So AM ID matches to J500. AM first matches to Sammy. AM last matches to Jones, so on and so forth. But you can switch these around if you use a column list and do them out of order if you wanted to. So the column list allows you to do them in any order, and then also only you can specify the specific columns in which you want to insert values into. So if you wanted to omit a column name from this insert to column list, what that is going to do in that case, if you're not specifying a value, is it is going to insert a null value. So again, a null value is where there's no data in that record. It's not a blank or a space. Those are actually, that is actually a value. Null means there is no data whatsoever. So there's a couple of ways you can do this, and I'm going to show you really quickly in SQL Plus how to do this. But one way is you can do an insert into Account Manager, and let's say we have our column list. Bear with me while I type these in. Last, AME date, AM sal, AM com. So we also have an AM region field there, or it's just called region. So there's actually 7 columns in this table, but I'm only going to list 6 here, so I can only list the first 6 columns, and then I can do values of L500, Mandy, Lopez, 01, October, 09, 47,000, 1,500, and I can specify the null keyword here. And I'm sorry, I don't want to put null here. I'm sorry about that. So I have 6 column names, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I have 6 values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I run it this way, it's going to insert these values, and then in the region field, it's going to have null, a null value for that column, because I haven't listed the column here in the column list. So that's one way you can do it. The other way, I'll go ahead and run this, and you can see I'm missing the region in this by doing it this way. I can also do insert into Account Manager, and I can do the same values, only this time I'm going to put null at the end. So I can just type the word null in here, and that's going to input a null into the table. I'm going to change the ID here. I don't know if there's any constraints on this table. I don't think that there are, but just in case. See, Account Manager. And so now I have my other record, and again, it inserts a null value. So that is how you can actually just insert a null value into your table. Let's see. Let's move on to the next slide. I'm not going to do an example on how to do this, but in Oracle, this is actually just came into Oracle 12c. So if you're using Oracle 11g, like we're actually using Oracle 11g, I believe, still as of the time of this video in the class. But with Oracle 12c, you can actually add this default setting. So you can issue an alter table command, a DDL statement, to modify a column and say if the column is null, then default it to this value. So in this case, defaulting it to 0. So whenever they insert the values, whenever they insert null for the AM salary value, when they actually insert it, you can see it puts a 0 in for AM salary, just as a default. So that's a new option within Oracle 12c. I don't think you don't have any quiz questions or homework questions on that. There's also something called a virtual column, which we won't go very deep into. But a virtual column is basically, let's say in our data, we have this salary column, we have this commission column. We can create basically a virtual column or a calculated column that is the salary plus the commission. So if the salary is $53,000 and the commission is $6,000, then this AM earn, which is a virtual column, would be $59,000, as you can see here. So the key thing to take away here is if you have a virtual column like this where it's doing a calculation and you are inserting a value, doing an insert statement on it, you aren't allowed to insert a value for that. It has to be automatically calculated by the database. So you can't insert the 59,000 value in the table. You would just want to leave that column completely off of the list, and it will automatically calculate 53,000 plus 6,000. Another thing to note that you will have homework questions on this is that you can't have constraint violations when you add data or when you modify data in the database. So for example, if we were trying to insert onto let's say the orders table, so if we have a table with all of our orders, which we do in the Just Lead Books database, and we try to insert a value, a customer number that doesn't exist in the customers table, there's a foreign key on that customer column, and it's going to throw an error and say, hey, you can't insert this record in the orders table with this customer number because that customer number doesn't exist in the customers table. So that is you can have foreign key violations whenever you insert or update data. So that's something to keep in mind when you are moving forward here. There's also a default option, so you can use the default again to add default values. Next thing on inserting, this is the last thing we'll talk about with the insert statements, is if you wanted to copy data from one table into another table, and you didn't, as you can see when we do insert into, it's inserting one row at a time, one record at a time. So if you wanted to insert 5 records, you would need to have 5 different insert into statements with 5 different values clauses that will insert those 5 records. So if you don't want to have to type out all 5 of those or 20 of those insert statements, what you can do is use a subquery for the values clause. So instead of having a values clause, you have a subquery. And the way that works is you have the insert into statement. So in this example, we're going to insert into account bonus, and you specify your column list, and then you can write a subquery, a select query, where you select data from another table or from the same table if you wanted to, and specify the values here in the select statement, and that will insert those records into the account bonus table. So let's try it really quick in ours and see if it works. So if I select all right now from the account bonus table, there's no data. And if I select all from account manager, I have 3 records. So I should be able to insert 3 records into this table using this method. So if I do insert into account bonus ID salary region, and then I select the ID, the salary, and the region from account manager. That should create 3 rows. And now if we go back and select from our bonus table, we should see those records in the table now. So that's a good way to copy data from one table to another very quickly without having to write a bunch of insert statements. And so one last thing I just thought of that I want to make sure I briefly mention is if you have to insert a value that has a single quote in it, so your book has an example of O'Hara, if you were inserting a name called O'Hara, if you want to be able to handle, so obviously Oracle interprets a single quote as the end of a string value. So to handle that, you want to put an additional single quote in there. So if you were inserting a value, so let's say you're saying values O'Hara, this wouldn't work. But what you can do is put 2 single quotes together like this, and Oracle will interpret that as a single quote. So that is the way you can insert values if you have a single quote in the value that you're trying to insert. So just a little side note there. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so the next DML statement that we're going to talk about is the update statement. So this is where you already have value, or you already have data in your database in a table, but then you need to update that data. Let's say you wanted to update the region or a customer number or a customer's name changed from Lopez to something else. You can use an update statement to modify that data. So again, it would add. You can add values to an existing row, so by replacing a null value, or you can change existing values. So the update command, so there's just the word update, and then you identify the table. So if you want to update the account manager table, it's update account manager. So for example, update account manager. Then the next clause is the set clause. So set is where you identify the columns that are being changed and then the new values. So for example, if I wanted to set the employment date, change the employment date for an employee to 01 August 09, that is where I do my set clause. Now, optional is you can have a where clause where you specify exactly which row will be updated. Very important to note here, if you don't limit this update statement down with a where clause, it's going to update all the rows in your table. So if I just did into this here, it updated all 3 rows within my table. So if I look at account manager, excuse me, you see all of the employment dates are the 1st of August 2009. Let's say I want to just update T500, Nick Taylor. I can do an update, account manager, set the date equal to 01 October 09, where the AM ID equals T500. So now you can see I've updated my single record with October 1st, 2009. So again, the where clause, the where clause in the update statement works just like a select statement, and you can filter down the data to exactly what you want to update. So what I normally recommend doing is before you're going to do an update on the database, I always like to select the data just like I've done here. That way I can filter it down and I can say select all from account manager where AMID equals L500. And so that if I know I want to update that record, I can basically copy that where clause, where AMID equals L500. I can copy that and use it in my update statement. So then I can just do update account manager set whatever column equal to this, and then copy that where clause. That way I know exactly which record I'm updating. So that's always an option for you. Here again is the syntax for the update statements. Here is an example, very similar. Now, one thing we did not do in our example just now is that you can update multiple columns in one update statement. So you can say update account manager, and you can update the employment date to the 10th of October 2009, and then if you separate it with a comma, you can then do region equals whatever, S for South. So you can do as many columns as you want to here just by separating them by a comma. Okay? Now, there's also something that is not used very often, but is something that the book goes over, so we'll talk about it, is that is a substitution variable. If you didn't want to have to create a bunch of update statements, or you didn't want to have to specify in the update statement what the values are going to be, you can issue substitution variables, which will then prompt the user to enter a value. So the variables are identified by an ampersand symbol and then a variable name. So you can actually, if you wanted to save a script, you could run a script that has the substitution variables, and that would allow you to prompt the user to enter a value. So let's do this substitution variable example. Now, you guys have probably noticed the book is using SQL Developer tool, which is a much prettier GUI than SQL+, and we're going to use that in later chapters. But for now, we're going to show you how to do this in SQL+. So if I update customers and set the region equal to ampersand region, so that's our substitution variable, where state equals ampersand state. Now, when I run this, what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, please enter a value for the region. And so I can say region is W, and for West. And then I can say where the state is, let's say CA for California. And I hit that, and 3 rows were updated. So if I select all from the customers table where the let's say where the state equals CA, I should see here where the region is set to W for West. So that's how you use the substitution variables. And that is pretty much it on when it comes to update statements. Again, update statements, same as insert statements, you can violate foreign keys, so just be a little bit careful there. Okay. Next DML statement is the delete statement. This is also very simple. It's simply the delete command from, so just like select star from, you just delete from and then the table name. So, and then you again add a where clause to determine which record or row that you actually want to delete from the table. If you don't have a where clause, it's going to delete everything from the table. So be careful with that. If you don't specify a where clause, it's going to remove all the rows from the table. So delete from account manager would delete everything from the account manager table. So just as a quick example, if I select all from account manager again, let's say I want to delete that third record, that's the L501 record. If I say delete from account manager where AMID equals L501, I can delete my one row, and then when I select all from account manager, that row is no longer there. So that is the basic delete statement. There's not much else to that one. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, at the beginning of this lecture, I talked about how you can change, you don't have to permanently save these changes that you make. You can actually have the opportunity to roll them back or to undo those changes, and that is through these transaction control statements. So what happens is whenever you issue a DML statement, such as an insert or an update or a delete, it's not permanently updated to the table until a commit occurs. So Oracle is unique in this aspect. You don't see this in Microsoft SQL Server or even in, I don't even think you see it in MySQL, but in Oracle you control it with these transaction control statements. So it's just saved temporarily in a transaction control table until you issue a commit command, which will then permanently save it to the database. So, for an example, where I just deleted, let's do a different one. Let's do, let's do an update instead. So let me update. Let's update account manager and set the AM first equal to John, where the AMID is T500. So this should update the first name from Nick to John. Now if I select all from account manager, I see it's now John. If I do commit here, I've now committed that result to the database, and it can no longer be changed without me issuing another update statement. But if I do the same the same thing, let's change it back to Nick. And I select all from account manager. Now it's back to Nick. But if I do a rollback command, I can then do a select again, and instead of being Nick, it's back to being John. So until I do that commit, I can always roll back the transaction until I do. Once I issue a commit, though, it is saved. Now, the commit command can be issued explicitly or implicitly. If it's issued explicitly, that means you actually explicitly type in the commit command and run it, and that will commit the value. Implicitly means it will issue the commit command if you exit the system. So if I shut down SQL Plus after I have issued my update statement, it's going to go ahead and commit those changes. If I don't exit, I can then have the opportunity to do the rollback. So that's explicit versus implicit commit. So explicit means you actually type commit in and issue that command. Implicit, if you close out of the program or if there's a certain DDL command that's issued, like a create table, that can also commit the changes. You've also got the rollback command, which I just showed you. That way you can sort of undo the table. So if your system crashes, which is not exiting out of SQL Plus properly, most of the time you can roll back from there as well. You also have something called a save point, which is where if you're issuing a bunch of update statements, such as this, update, update, you can actually set a save point 1 and then issue a rollback to 1. So if you see here there's a save point 1, I can then roll back to that particular save point if I want to. So I'm issuing these update statements, and I committed here with a permanent save. Then I did another update and another update. I saved there right there, and then I did another update. So when I roll back, it's going to roll back this command back to this point. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the last thing to talk about here quickly are table locks. So table locks prevent users from changing the same data or object. So if two people are logged into the same database and they're trying to update, we don't want them to update the same data. Let's say I was trying to update a table and change that name from Nick to John, and someone else was trying to change it from Nick to Adam. Excuse me. We don't want that to happen because that, excuse me, that creates some issues with our data. So what Oracle does is if I am issuing a update to a table, it actually puts a lock on that record, on that row, so that no one else can change it at the same time. So there's two types of locks. There is a shared lock and an exclusive lock. A shared lock will prevent you from doing DML operations on a portion of the database. So if I am selecting a record, it's not going to allow that record to be updated. A DML operation such as an update to be performed on that row of the table. There's also the exclusive type of lock, which prevents the preventing other exclusive or shared lock. So the lock table command. So if you can issue a lock table command, and this happens behind the scenes with Oracle, but it will lock a portion of the table that's affected by DML operations. So it implicitly, that's what I mean as behind the scenes. So if you don't explicitly do a lock table command, it will implicitly happen when you do an update or a delete. So the shared lock will be placed on that record that you're trying to update or delete, or those records that you're trying to update or delete. Or you can do it explicitly through the lock table command. And the lock is going to be released when you do a commit. So as I'm updating these records, before I do the commit or the rollback, that there is a lock that has been put on those records to prevent it from being updated by anyone else. It also implicitly locks the table for DDL operations such as create or alter table. So we don't want to have someone altering a table while I'm trying to update a record. What if they are trying to delete a column that I'm trying to update? So it also puts an implicit lock on there for a create and alter table or other DDL operations. And then it's explicitly locked again through the lock table command with the exclusive mode option. We won't get into the for update, and that's pretty much it for this chapter. So again, insert values, update values, delete values, those are DML transactions that we can run on the database to change data within our database. In your book, after the chapter summary, there's actually a good syntax summary as there is for most chapters. But the syntax summary, I'd encourage you to look through that if you want to just check the syntax and make sure you understand it. The insert, update, delete, those are all pretty simple from a syntax perspective, so you shouldn't have too much trouble with it. The homework this week also, hopefully you won't have too much trouble with that either. It's fairly straightforward, and I think that we have covered everything in the chapter that's on the homework. One thing I just thought of, going back to delete statements that I didn't think of, or I don't think I mentioned, is if you have if you're trying to delete from a child table. So if there's a foreign key on a table and it's a child table and you're trying to delete a record from that, it also has to be deleted from the parent record as well. So, or actually I said that backwards. If you're trying to delete it from the parent, it also has to be deleted from the child. So for example, if we have a customer table and an orders table, as I mentioned before, and we have a customer table that lists all of our customers, and then we have a orders table that lists all the orders and it has a foreign key on the customer number. If I try to delete a customer from the customer table and they have orders tied to them in the orders table, you have to delete the child records first before you delete the parent record. So you're going to need to go into the orders table first and delete all of the records for that customer, and then you can go to the customer table and delete the customer from the customer table. So you can't delete the parent record and then leave the child records out there. So that's part of the reason why we have a constraint and a foreign key on those tables, is to prevent those records from becoming orphaned. So because if you deleted a record or a row from the customer table, then you would have child records out there with no parent. So they're orphaned and they're sitting out there and they're not referencing a valid customer. So just be careful. I think you have a homework question on that. Just make sure you delete the child records first and then the parent records. Okay, I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, as always, send me an email and I will answer them as soon as I can. Thanks.